They thought I'd never come back, that while I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines and fighting for my life, they could steal the only thing that mattered, the 5 acres my father left me, the place where I buried my wife's ashes beneath a towering maple tree. When I got out, the tree was gone, and in its place stood the cold skeletons of 27 luxury townhomes. My name's Daniel Cross, and this isn't just about property. It's about betrayal, memory, and justice. The kind you can't buy with a lawyer or settle with a handshake. You're watching Tomato Tales, and this is how I tore down everything they built over her grave. That patch of land wasn't just dirt. It was history, carved out of rock and sweat by my old man back in 1982. We cleared it together with a chainsaw that barely ran, and a tractor that coughed more than it drove. He told me, a home ain't a home unless it's got a landmark, something that reminds you where you belong. That landmark was a maple tree, thick as a truck, standing right in the center of the land. When my wife Laura passed, I buried her ashes beneath its roots. I promised her I'd build a cabin there, a quiet place for our daughter and the grandkids to visit someday. For years, that promise kept me alive, until the Crescent Valley Homeowners Association came along, led by Martha Kane, a woman who smiled like she was already writing your obituary. She'd stop by every few months, clipboard in hand, calling my land underused community space. I showed her the deed, stamped and sealed from 1969. She smiled that politician's smile and said, "Paperwork can be messy, Mr. Cross. We'll let our lawyers check, for the greater good of the neighborhood." I didn't think much of it. I had the proof. And then my heart gave out, literally. 3 weeks in a hospital bed gave me too much time to think. When I finally drove home, I expected silence, the sound of leaves in the wind. Instead, I found concrete, cranes, and the smell of wet cement. My fence was gone, my tree gone, and my wife's resting place and buried under Building C of Crescent Valley Phase 3. That's when I knew they built fast. But I've spent a lifetime learning how to tear things down faster. The day I walked into the county office and realized how deep the corruption went, and how I'd use their own blueprints to destroy them. If you believe in fighting back against greed, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see what comes next. The morning after I found the condos, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at my old deed, the same one my father and I signed over 40 years ago. His thumbprint still smudged in the corner like a ghost saying, "Don't you dare let them take this." By sunrise, I was already parked outside the county clerk's office. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed like angry bees, the smell of coffee and dust heavy in the air. I handed the clerk my parcel number, expecting a simple confirmation. Instead, she frowned, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke. "Mr. Cross, according to the system, this land is registered under the Crescent Valley Homeowners Association." The words didn't even make sense. I owned that land. I had the deed, the taxes, the proof. "How?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. She turned the monitor so I could see. There it was, a document stamped "Intent to Develop," filed 3 months earlier by Martha Kane herself. Attached was a survey map dated 1998, claiming my property line fell within HOA boundaries. A 25-year-old survey, one that was never finalized. They'd used a clerical error, a glitch in the system, to steal my land. I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't just built illegally, they'd built strategically, counting on me being too old or too sick to notice. And they were right. Almost. I left the clerk's office without another word. The copy of that fraudulent map folded in my hand like a declaration of war. By the time I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. Martha Kane. Her voice dripped with fake sympathy. "Daniel, I just heard about your confusion. Why don't you come to our community meeting tonight? Let's clear this up like neighbors." Neighbors. She built on my wife's grave and still called herself my neighbor. I agreed to show up, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to look that woman in the eye when the truth started to crack around her. That evening, the Crescent Valley clubhouse was packed. Rows of folding chairs, bad coffee, and the smugness of people who think they own the world. Martha stood at the front in her red blazer, holding the microphone like a preacher. She talked about progress and community improvement. Then she gestured toward me. "Mr. Cross, would you like to share your concerns?" Dozens of eyes turned my way. I stood up slowly, holding my father's deed in one hand and the stolen map in the other. "This land," I said, "isn't community space. It's family. It's legacy. And you built on it without a single ounce of truth." The room went silent. Martha smiled, that slow, poisonous kind of smile. "Mr. Cross," she said sweetly, "what's done is done. Perhaps we can offer you compensation to resolve this misunderstanding." Compensation. A bribe wrapped in politeness. I looked right at her. "You didn't just steal my land, you built over my wife's resting place. And for that, there's not enough money in the world." Her smile faded. The crowd began whispering. And that's when I knew. The war had officially begun. Show you how one buried utility line became my secret weapon, and how their million-dollar condos were doomed before the paint even dried. If you're rooting for justice, hit that subscribe button. Things are about to blow wide open. After that meeting, I didn't yell. I didn't threaten, I just walked out. Quietly. The same people who used to wave at me from their driveways now looked at me like I was the ghost haunting their perfect little neighborhood. But I wasn't their ghost. I was their reckoning. For the next few days, I stayed off their radar. No calls, no complaints, no visits. That's how you win a war, not by noise, but by patience. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. Lawyers talk too much. I needed someone who could see through dirt and paperwork alike. That's when I called Lena Briggs, one of the best civil surveyors I ever worked with. Back when I ran demolitions, she was the only person who could find a buried gas line in the dark with nothing but a map and a bad flashlight. I trusted her. We met at a rundown diner 30 miles out of town. She was already there, sipping black coffee, eyes sharp as ever. "Been a while, Cross," she said. "You usually only call when something's about to explode." I gave a tired smile. "This time, it's legal, for now." I spread the papers across the table. My deed, my dad's old notes, and the fraudulent 1998 map the HOA filed. She scanned them like a detective, her eyes narrowing. "This survey's a mess," she said finally. "It's not even certified. They used a preliminary draft and passed it off as final." She tapped her finger against one corner of the HOA's map. "See that faint line? That's a utility easement, 20 feet wide, sewer line installed in '79. I frowned. "You sure?" She nodded. "Positive. That means they didn't just steal your land. They built on top of county infrastructure." I felt a slow, dark smile form. An easement isn't just a technicality. It's sacred ground in construction law. You can't build over it. You can't block it, and if you do, that structure becomes illegal by definition. Lena leaned in, lowering her voice. "Daniel, 12 of those condos sit directly above that sewer main. One crack, one pressure shift, and the entire system backs up for half a mile. The county will have to condemn the site. It was better than revenge. It was justice written in pipe and concrete. She slid a folder across the table. I'll get you the original blueprints and county easement records by tomorrow. Quietly. I nodded. Lena, this stays between us. She smirked. You know me, Cross. I like watching bad people hang themselves with their own paperwork. That night, I drove to the ridge overlooking the condos. The site lights burned bright, cutting through the darkness like artificial suns. They were still building, fast, greedy, careless. But I wasn't angry anymore, I was calm. Because now, I had their weakness buried beneath their feet. I put the first crack in their empire, one roadblock at a time. You'll see how a single access road became the start of their downfall. If you're rooting for Daniel to get justice, hit that subscribe button. It's about to get brutal. For the next few days, I didn't go near the construction site. Let them think I'd given up. That's how people like Martha Kane operate. They mistake silence for surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. I was setting the board. The map Lena gave me lay open on my kitchen table. Every line, every marking was burned into my mind. Especially that sewer easement slicing right under their shiny new condos. They'd built over a ticking time bomb and they didn't even know it yet. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Not yet. First, I needed leverage. See, there was one detail Martha and her crew had overlooked. The only road connecting their construction site to the main highway wasn't public. It was mine. A 20-foot wide dirt road deeded to my father and to me back in 1964. It wasn't much, just gravel and dust, but legally it was a lifeline. So I decided to cut it. Before dawn the next morning, I loaded up my old flatbed with concrete barriers, the same ones my crew used for demolition sites. My foreman, Randy, met me halfway. He didn't ask questions. He'd been with me long enough to recognize that look. We parked across the entrance and dropped each barrier in place, one after another. When we were done, we hung a fresh sign. Private road, no trespassing, access by deed 72B. Then I turned off my truck and waited. By 7:30 a.m., the first cement trucks showed up. 5 of them. Engines humming, each one burning money by the minute. The site foreman climbed out, red-faced and shouting, "You can't block this road." I leaned against my truck, calm as ever. "You're standing on my property," I said. "And that sign says otherwise." He threatened to call the police. I told him to go ahead, but reminded him he'd be reporting himself for trespassing. That shut him up. They spent the rest of the day rerouting their deliveries down a narrow back road, adding 3 miles and 2 hours to every trip. Every delay cost them money. Every minute they lost made Martha sweat. That night, as I stood on the hill overlooking the site, I saw the construction lights flicker like fireflies in panic. They were behind schedule, exactly where I wanted them. In war, the first strike doesn't have to be loud. It just has to make them realize they're losing control. County clerk stamps a piece of paper that changes everything. A single permit that turns their dream homes into condemned property. The morning after I blocked the road, the calls started. Unknown numbers, angry voicemails, threats wrapped in legal language. Martha Kane must have realized she'd poked the wrong bear, but I didn't answer a single one, because I was already 3 steps ahead. That afternoon I drove down to the county records office. Not the shiny new building up front, but the basement archives. The place where the real records live. The kind that never make it into fancy online systems. That's where I found Frank Dalton, a clerk who'd been working there since before Crescent Valley even existed. He owed me a favor. Years ago, when a water main burst down there, my demolition crew worked all weekend patching the leak for free. He hadn't forgotten. Daniel Cross, he said, looking up from his paperwork with a grin. Didn't expect to see you here again. What can I do for you? I slid a single form across his desk. A demolition permit application? He raised an eyebrow. For what site? I leaned forward. Parcel 184B at my land. The one the HOA's building on. He frowned, flipping through the document. You're saying there's already construction there? I nodded. Unauthorized. Over a utility easement. I've got the county map and the proof. Frank read every line carefully. His expression shifted from curious to serious. Damn, he muttered. You're right. This shouldn't have been approved in the first place. I pointed at the reason section of the form. I'd written in bold letters. Unsafe structure erected without owner's consent, violating Municipal Code 112B. Frank didn't ask another question. He stamped the paper so hard the echo filled the room. Permit number 734. Active immediately. Valid for 90 days. When that stamp hit, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't satisfaction, not yet. It was inevitability. Frank slid the paper back to me. No one will see this unless they know exactly where to look, he said quietly. I nodded. Good. The fewer people who know, the safer it is. I folded the permit, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and walked out of that basement like a man walking away from the fuse he just lit. Outside, the sun was blinding. The air smelled like dust and diesel from the construction site just a few miles away. They were still hammering away, pouring concrete, raising walls, dreaming of ribbon cuttings and photo ops. And they had no idea that every nail they drove brought them closer to collapse. The HOA sends the cops to my door trying to scare me off. But what they didn't know was that I had their drone, their footage, and their biggest mistake caught on camera. 3 days after I got the demolition permit, peace didn't last. Never does when you're standing between greedy people and their money. It started with a knock. 3 sharp raps that made the walls hum. When I opened the door, 2 sheriff's deputies stood on my porch. One young and jumpy, the other older with that I've seen it all look. Mr. Cross? The older one asked. Yeah, he nodded, flipping through a notepad. We've received a complaint from a Miss Martha Kane of the Crescent Valley Homeowners Association. She's reported threats, harassment, and possible illegal surveillance. There it was, Martha's first counter-strike. I didn't even flinch. I haven't spoken to her or anyone from her development since the meeting, I said calmly. But if she wants to talk about surveillance, she might want to explain this. I turned, grabbed my tablet off the kitchen counter and brought it back. With a swipe, I played a video recorded 2 nights before, clear as day, time-stamped and beautiful. A drone hovered over my backyard for nearly 10 minutes, its lights blinking red against the night sky. It zoomed in on my porch, my windows, my granddaughter's swing set. That drone, I said, pausing the frame, is registered to the Crescent Valley HOA. The younger deputy blinked. You're sure? I zoomed in further. The registration tag was visible under the frame. Positive. They've been spying on me, officers. Over private property, over my family. The older cop sighed. Not at me, but at the situation. He'd seen this dance before. Rich people cry victim. Working people get the visit. We'll have a word with Miss Kane, he said finally, closing his notepad. Try to keep things civil, Mr. Cross. They left. But the damage was done. When I turned around, my granddaughter Lily was standing in the hallway, clutching her stuffed bear. Grandpa, are you in trouble? I knelt down, forcing a smile I didn't feel. No, sweetheart. Grandpa is just fixing a misunderstanding. But her eyes said she didn't believe me. And when my daughter Ellie showed up later that night, the fight I'd been avoiding finally hit home. Dad, she said, voice shaking. What are you doing? The police? The roadblock? You're scaring the kids. They're the ones trespassing, I said quietly. They stole your mother's resting place. I'm not backing down, she looked at me, really looked. And I saw it. The fear, the exhaustion. Please, she whispered. Just take their money and walk away. Can't lose you too. Her words hit harder than any lawsuit could. For the first time, I hesitated. For the first time, I wondered if maybe revenge was costing more than I could afford. But then, later that night, I saw their construction lights again. Bright as day. Right over where Laura's ashes once lay. And I remembered why I started this. This wasn't about dirt. This was about memory. About promise. About love. And I swore to myself. They were going to pay for every inch they stole. The night rain fell on concrete, and I realized they weren't just building homes. They were bearing proof, and that's when I decided it was time to strike back. Rain had been spitting all afternoon, that weak, angry drizzle that makes everything look guilty. I parked on the ridge and watched the floodlights carve ugly squares into the night. From up there, the site looked like a wound someone had stitched with plywood and plastic. I was half a mile away when I first saw them. A couple of the crew were working at the footprint where the maple had stood, the place where Laura's ashes had been buried. They weren't working on anything that looked like construction. They were dragging bags and tossing broken concrete into a shallow pit, then shoveling dirt over it like they were burying trash. My stomach clenched. I'd seen callous before, but this was another level. They weren't just building over the grave. They were using it as their private landfill. It felt like salt poured on an old wound. I didn't storm the site. I don't do headlines, I do evidence. I drove closer, kept to the shadows, and watched. The foreman barked orders like he was conducting an orchestra of indifference. The workers tossed rebar, paint cans, and plastic barrels into the hole. One of them laughed about making new ground. My hands wanted to move. My mouth wanted to say things that would burn the night. Instead, I called Lena. She showed up within the hour, boots sinking into the mud, clipboard in hand, and that same look she gets when a map finally tells a secret. We walked the perimeter quietly. She poked at the ground where the crew had been dumping and frowned. This isn't just landfill, she said. They're covering an area that ties directly into the easement. If they compact that, it'll mask work that compromises the sewer main access. The county won't be able to inspect properly later. Perfect. Their arrogance was my ally. We took pictures from a distance, recorded timestamps, noted truck plates. I already had cameras, the kind that pinged me when motion hit the yard. Nothing fancy, just enough to prove patterns. I didn't post anything online. That was for later, when the story needed to land like a hammer. Back at my workshop, I spread everything out on the bench like evidence on a coroner's table. Lena's notes, the photos from the ridge, the township map with that glaring easement, and a fresh page from my own notebook. A plan to angle the county, the media, and the investors' eyes in the right direction. This wasn't about drama. It was about making sure the right people saw the right things at the right time. I called Frank at the records office and told him we had a new problem, a deliberate attempt to hide illegal work. He didn't ask for details. He just said, "Bring me everything. We'll pull the inspection files." That was enough. That night, I drove home slower than usual. The lights of the construction site were a bruise on the landscape. The pit where they dumped their garbage lay under those lights like a secret they'd think was safe. They were wrong. They'd thought covering the stump would bury the memory. Instead, it gave me the leverage I needed. It wasn't a hammer blow yet, just the first chip that would bring the whole wall down. I pushed the county inspector to the site, and everything they tried to hide starts leaking out. The HOA's excuses begin to fall apart in public. When you spend decades in construction, you learn one truth. Nothing spreads panic faster than an official clipboard. That's why I made sure the county inspector came to Crescent Valley unannounced. Frank had kept his promise. He slipped my complaint into the right pile, And by Wednesday morning, a gray county truck pulled up at the development gates. The workers froze mid-pour, trying to figure out who the man in the safety vest was. From the ridge, I watched Inspector Hollis, tall, quiet, the kind of guy who doesn't talk until he's sure you're lying. He walked the site like a detective at a crime scene. I didn't have to tell him what to look for. Lena's notes and photos were already in his hands. When he reached the pit where they dumped the debris, he stopped cold. He pulled a probe from his tool bag, pushed it into the soil, and frowned. Then another. Same result. Soft fill over unstable ground. He motioned the foreman over. Who authorized disposal here? The foreman stammered something about temporary containment. Hollis didn't respond. He just took a photo and wrote something in red ink. Red means violation. Within an hour, the sound of machinery stopped. The developer's phone lit up like a Christmas tree, and from the clubhouse balcony, I could see Martha watching, her perfect posture stiff as a board. By noon, Hollis ordered a partial stop work notice. Half the site was frozen pending structural review. That meant investors would start asking questions. Questions that could rip holes in every one of Martha's lies. That evening, I met Lena at the diner again. She laid out the day's notes. He's going to file a full environmental impact review, she said. That'll drag them for weeks, maybe months. I nodded. Good. Time's the one thing they can't afford. But I wasn't smiling. Because I knew Martha. Cornered people don't quit. They claw back. And sure enough, just before midnight, headlights rolled up my driveway. Black SUV, two men I didn't recognize. They didn't get out, just sat there for a minute before pulling away, slow. A message, not a visit. I watched the taillights fade and felt that familiar calm slide over me. The kind that comes before the next move in a long game. The HOA goes from legal threats to personal ones. They make one move too many, and I decide it's time to show them what real demolition looks like. They say desperate people make desperate choices. Martha Kane and her allies didn't just panic. They started playing the kinds of games you only see in bad movies. Only this was real life, and someone was about to get filmed. After Inspector Hollis slapped that partial stop work notice on the site, the whole development hummed with nervous energy. Crews idled. Investors called. The clubhouse newsletter that used to sing Martha's praises suddenly read like a prayer for calm. But prayers don't pour concrete back into torn foundations. A few days later, Lena called me. Her voice was clipped. "Bring your recorder," she said. "And don't bring anyone you can't trust." I knew what that meant. Something had happened that needed proof. She met me in the parking lot of a hardware store with a woman I'd never seen before. A subcontractor named Maya Ruiz. Maya smelled like diesel and honest work. She had calloused hands and the sort of tired eyes that mean you can't be bought. She set a small digital voice recorder on the dashboard and slid into the passenger seat. She couldn't sleep, Maya said without preamble. They weren't paying us right. I was mad, so I went to the clubhouse to get answers. I ran into Ann Rohr, you remember her? One of Martha's board members. They were in the inspector's car, out by the back road. They thought no one would see. Maya hit play. The recorder hummed. Then Martha's voice came through. Polite at first, the croon of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Hollis, we can make this go away," she said. "Cash up front, no questions. Think of your family's future." Hollis's voice, low, tired, and replied, "I don't take bribes." Martha laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Not a bribe. Consider it a consulting fee for expedited handling. We'll give you cash and you'll mark this site as compliant." She offered the envelope. He refused. She kept pressing. The recorder captured every syllable, the rustle of paper, the quiet desperation of a woman who'd convinced herself rules didn't apply to her. We played it for Frank at the records office and watched his face go pale. He had a direct line to the county DA. He called it in. The DA's office didn't blink. They moved like a machine built for moments like this. Within 48 hours, there was an investigation into attempted bribery of a public official. When the story hit the county news, it spread like wildfire. People who'd once applauded Martha's vision suddenly saw the rot beneath the gloss. Investors started panicking. Board members who'd sat smugly in meetings now met in whispers. Ann Rohr resigned first, citing personal reasons. Then others followed. The clubhouse suddenly smelled less of coffee and more of endings. Martha didn't go quietly. She laced up her righteous speeches and tried to frame the whole mess as a smear campaign. But video exists. Paper trails exist. A recorded offer of cash is a hard thing to argue with in public. The HOA held an emergency meeting 2 nights later. This time the room wasn't full of accusation. It was full of people demanding answers. The investors wanted distance. The community wanted truth. Within an hour, the board voted to dissolve the HOA. Martha was escorted out of the building by security, her red blazer gone cold under the fluorescent lights. I watched it all from the back of the room, while Ellie gripped my hand like a lifeline. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The weight of watching your enemy fall is heavy enough without tears. The day they tried to celebrate on her grave, and I brought a bulldozer to a ribbon cutting. The HOA was gone, but the condos still stood, a gray monument to everything they stole. When the new developer announced a grand opening, complete with a ribbon cutting and a photo spread in the local paper, I laughed out loud. They were planning to celebrate on the ground where my wife rested. It wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. The night before the ceremony, I parked the flatbed by the old ridge again. The permit Frank had stamped still sat in my glove box. Valid, legal, undisputed. I checked the coordinates twice. The same spot where the easement cut through their main access line. Legally, that section was mine to maintain, and the county had already ordered soil testing for instability. Testing needed equipment. Heavy equipment, I called Randy. No questions, just a location and a time. By dawn, the old bulldozer we used to pull barn foundations was chained to the flatbed. It rattled like memory itself. By 9, the crowd gathered at the condos. Reporters, investors, county officials, all in pressed jackets, smiling like the world was new. Martha was conspicuously absent, but her legacy stood front and center. Bright ribbons and a banner reading, Crescent Valley, a new beginning. The microphone screeched as the developer took the podium. He was halfway through his speech when the bulldozer's engine growled from the ridge. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. I drove slowly, steady, down the slope toward the lot line. The crowd split like a wave as the dozer rolled onto the gravel. I stopped just short of the ribbon and climbed out. Holding up permit 734, Frank's red stamp shone like a brand. This area, I said, loud enough for every camera to catch, has been officially condemned pending demolition review. By order of the county, the developer tried to protest, but Inspector Hollis appeared from behind a truck, clipboard in hand. Mr. Cross is within his rights, he said. Construction violates active easement code, section 112B. Gasps, murmurs, flashbulbs. I started the dozer again, easing it forward just enough to touch the fresh concrete curb. It crumbled like chalk. I didn't destroy the buildings. I didn't need to. I just needed to prove they were built on lies. Lena filmed the entire scene. By evening, the video was everywhere. Homeowner crashes ribbon cutting with legal demolition permit. People cheered. Some called me crazy. I didn't care. Laura's name was spoken again. Finally, for the truth. That night I walked back to the ridge. Rain fell lightly on the mud. washing the last of the construction dust off the roots of that maple stump. I stood there a long time just listening. Not to machines, not to anger, but to peace. The fallout spreads further than I ever planned. When the developers sue for damages and the county turns to me for answers, I find out that revenge always comes with a price. Peace doesn't last long when money's involved. 2 weeks after the ribbon-cutting disaster, I got the first letter. Thick envelope, corporate letterhead. More ink than honesty. Inside was a lawsuit notice. Property damage, defamation. Interference with economic advantage, classic. They couldn't beat me with concrete, so they'd try with paper. Ellie read it first. She sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages while Lily played with crayons on the floor. "Dad," she said quietly, "they're asking for $500,000. I nodded. "They can ask for the moon, sweetheart. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but even I knew. This wasn't something to shrug off. Martha might have been gone, but the people behind her still had deep pockets and no conscience. They wanted to scare me into settling, to bleed me dry through court filings and deadlines. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Lena brought in a contact, Harold Vance, an environmental attorney with a spine of steel and a sense of humor black as tar. The kind of man who enjoyed reading building codes like bedtime stories. He listened, reviewed the easement maps, flipped through the photos, and smiled. "Mr. Cross," he said, "you're sitting on gold. They broke more laws than they poured foundations." He filed a counterclaim that same week. Illegal construction over county infrastructure. Attached was the full video of the ribbon cutting, the inspector's notes, and every time-stamped image of their waste pit. 3 days later, local news ran with it. Crescent Valley faces lawsuit for building over utility easement. Condos declared unsafe. Sales stopped overnight. Investors froze accounts. The same people who'd backed Martha were suddenly busy pretending they barely knew her. The project bled money faster than they could patch it. But while they crumbled, my world got smaller. The calls, the meetings, the stress. It started eating at me. Ellie noticed. She tried to talk me into dropping it, but I couldn't. Not when I stood every evening by that maple stump, seeing what was lost and what still needed to be made right. One night, I found an envelope taped to my truck door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a blurry shot of Lily's school bus stop. That was the moment everything changed again. Revenge had brought me this far, but this crossed a line. I called Harold, told him to push for an injunction, freeze every asset tied to Crescent Valley. Then I called the sheriff. If they wanted to play dirty, they were about to learn I'd dug my trenches decades deeper than they ever could. Because when you come after a man's family, you don't just threaten his peace, you guarantee your own downfall. They tried to scare me into silence. Instead, I turned their threats into headlines. The story that began with stolen land was about to end in a courtroom they couldn't control. Courtrooms smell like old paper and fear. The kind that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. I'd been in plenty of battles before, but this one felt different. This wasn't about blueprints or bulldozers anymore. It was about truth. The kind you can't buy, twist, or bury under contracts. When the Crescent Valley Development Group filed their lawsuit, they expected me to fold. They had a wall of lawyers, expensive suits, and a slideshow full of spin. I had Harold, a folder of facts, and the truth burned into my bones. The hearing was held in Branch County Court, a room that looked too clean for the kind of dirt it was about to witness. Martha didn't show. She'd vanished from public sight, her name whispered but never spoken. Instead, their lead attorney, slick hair, polished voice, did all the talking, Your Honor, he began. This man disrupted a legal project, endangered workers, and defamed our clients publicly. He gestured at me like I was a villain in a movie. Then he played their footage, carefully edited, cropped, the bulldozer rolling forward without the context, without the permit, without the lies that led to that moment. When he finished, Harold stood. Calm, quiet. "Permission to play Exhibit D," he said. He connected a drive, and suddenly the whole room filled with the sound of Martha Kane's voice, smooth and sharp as a knife. "The bribe recording. We can make this go away, Hollis. Cash, up front. Think of your family." The room froze. The judge leaned forward. The developer's lawyer paled. Harold didn't stop there. He pulled out the county maps, the stamped demolition permit, and the environmental reports showing waste buried on restricted soil. Then he held up the photo of the old maple stump. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is what they built over. This is the land they claimed as theirs. Mr. Cross didn't trespass, they did. He didn't destroy property, he protected it. And the only thing he endangered was their illusion of untouchable power." For the first time, I saw the developer's composure crack. He whispered to his partner, eyes darting toward the press seats where reporters were scribbling notes like wildfire. The judge didn't take long. After 2 recesses and a private review, she ruled, "Construction at Crescent Valley violates multiple municipal and environmental codes. All development is suspended pending demolition. Mr. Cross is cleared of all charges." Silence hung in the room, heavy, electric, final. Ellie gripped my hand. Lily, sitting behind us, smiled like the world had finally gone right again. Harold leaned over and whispered, "You just changed the way this county does business." Maybe I had. But sitting there, I didn't feel like a hero, just tired, like someone who'd been carrying a mountain and finally set it down. That night, I drove back to the ridge. The condos were empty, construction signs fluttering like surrender flags in the wind. The rain started again, soft this time, washing dust off the cracked concrete. I placed my hand on the stump, whispering to the memory buried beneath. "We did it, Laura, we got it back." What happened after the dust settled, and how a broken promise turned into something bigger than revenge, a legacy. The weeks after the trial felt strange, quiet, almost too quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to the sound of engines or phone calls. No construction noise, no shouting, no threats. Just the wind through the grass where the condos once stood half-built. Ghosts of greed in skeleton frames. The county ordered full demolition of Crescent Valley Phase 3. Hollis oversaw it himself. I didn't go at first, but when I finally drove by, I saw the bulldozers chewing through concrete, one wall at a time. Every crash echoed like punctuation marks at the end of a long, ugly sentence. When it was over, all that remained was open land, the same 5 acres my father once cleared with his bare hands. The maple's roots still ran beneath it, invisible but alive. Ellie and Lily helped me plant a new tree that spring. Not in the exact same spot, but close enough to feel her there. Lily pressed a handful of soil over the roots and looked up at me. "Is Grandma still here?" she asked. I nodded. "She never left, sweetheart. We just had to remind everyone where home really is." We built a small wooden bench beside the tree. Not fancy, not new. Just something to sit on when the world feels too heavy. Every time I visit, I think about how much that land has seen. My father's sweat, my wife's ashes, my own anger, and finally, peace. The county eventually offered me compensation for the ordeal. A settlement from the developers who wanted to disappear quietly. I turned it down. Money wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was for that land to stand for something again. So I registered it under a new name, the Laura Cross Memorial Grove, a protected community space, open to anyone who needed a quiet place to breathe. No HOA, no fences, just trees, wildflowers, and the sound of wind where greed once ruled. People started coming, hikers, old neighbors, even some of the workers who'd been forced to build those condos. They brought seeds, saplings, memories. It wasn't long before the grove became more than a patch of land. It became a story, a living reminder that not all things built on pain have to stay broken. Sometimes I still park up on the ridge, watch the sun set over those 5 acres, and feel Laura beside me, not in the ache of loss but in the quiet that follows justice. The kind of quiet that lets you breathe again. I glance at the bench, at Lily chasing fireflies across the field, and I think back to what my dad used to say. A home ain't a home unless it's got a landmark, something that reminds you where you belong. I smile. Because now, after everything, we've got one again. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about roots. How deep they go, how strong they grow, and how even after everything's been buried, truth finds a way back to the surface. You've been watching Tomato Tales, where every story finds its ending. And sometimes, that ending is peace.